Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallen. This is Thursday, and so as we do regularly now, we just put in the proviso, the caveat that we're speaking on Thursday afternoon. Anything can happen, but because our conversation is about tariffs and Canada's actions and reactions, we've got to put it in that context. But for now, there has been yet another reprieve of sorts. The reprieve was given to the Mexicans, now to us, and this is anything that's covered by NAFTA or USMCA will be exempt for another 30 days, but the details, the devil is always there. To help us sort all of this out, Perrin Beatty, former president and CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, and a former president and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. So that's a whole particular angle on this. And he was also president of the CBC, but we've forgiven him for that. So that's all right. He was
Thanks,
also the youngest MP, 22 years old when elected and served in government for many years. So we're grateful that you're here with us today, Perrin, to try and sort this out. Also with us, we need an economist mind. Robert Asselin, Senior Vice President of Policy at the Business Council of Canada, a senior fellow at the Monk School. He has served in Liberal governments under Paul Martin and Justin Trudeau, working with Bill Morneau. I guess we'll have to forgive you for that as we're forgiving Perrin. All of those things. So here we are. What do you make of it, Perrin, in general? There's a part of me that just thinks every time there's a reprieve, everybody has a sigh of relief, and we don't really grab the reins and get on with it really intensely. Will it be different this time?
Nobody knows. That's the bottom line, Pam. And when you started off saying it was important to make it clear that we are recording this on Thursday afternoon, you should have said at what minute on Thursday afternoon. Because
yes, that's exactly. Well, I'm in Regina, so
it is.
No, it's really true.
It depends on which way the winds are blowing. But yeah, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that whatever happens, even if Donald Trump were to pull away all of this, withdraw all of the threats that he's made, withdraw the tariffs, and try to restore a normal relationship, we would not go back to the way that it used to be. There's a new normal that he's created by breaking his word. And for 35 years, at least, since the signing of the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement and NAFTA, our relationship with the United States has been based on the premise that we had so much in common, so many shared interests, so many shared values, that neither of us would ever do anything deliberately to harm the other.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has demonstrated to us that we can never take that for granted again, and that the United States, under his leadership, is moving from being the anchor that guarantees peace, stability, prosperity, democracy, to being a threat in many ways, and that governments and businesses and leaders have to look at how do we mitigate the potential threat that could come if the wind changes and he decides to break his word again.
But let me just go back at it. And Robert, you and Perrin and myself in our various different roles have been involved in study after study, report after report on, and this is dating back to, Trump's first term where he talked about tariffs. He talked about tariffs through the whole campaign. And even if you go back as far as 9/11, what we have been talking about is the importance of getting ourselves ready, never mind who's in office in the US, but take down the interprovincial trade barriers, starting to broaden our horizons, make sure we have more capacity here at home to provide for ourselves. And it just seems like we're getting kind of caught out again, and everybody's saying we're going to do this right away. It's really important now.
Yeah, I called it the Sputnik moment for Canada, and hopefully this real crisis we're going through, which is based, I think, on real fundamentals changing. The protectionist agenda in the US is real, has manifested itself through different ways, even under Joe Biden as president, although he was less aggressive about it. and much more friendly. I would say was still a protectionist president.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
the way that Mr. Trump has gone about this in this second term, obviously in a very arbitrary, unreliable way, I would say, has put the threat to us. Look, I'm gonna be frank. I think this is gonna be really hard to rethink our economic structure in a way that we have been so integrated with the US. I don't think it's feasible in the short term to think we can just diversify on trade.
Right.
It will take some time. It will be difficult. At the end of the day, the US will still trade with the US. It will be on a less reliable partner, as we've seen. But this is a reality that we can't escape. On the domestic front, I think, Perrin and I, for years now, have been saying that we need to be much more intentional. We have to have the agency to control our own destiny on a growth agenda and a productivity agenda. I've spoken myself a lot about innovation, I think, which is foundational to productivity growth. And I'm hoping governments finally get it that what we're seeing now is if we don't do this, our prosperity is not assured going forward, and our living standards are not assured. And so we have the agency. We're still a very prosperous country, but this is not a given. We need to put together a policy framework, a policy agenda that is ambitious, that is bold, that is feasible, concrete actions, concrete execution, not just talks, as you say,
Yeah.
to move forward. And I would say a last point, beyond an electoral mandate, we cannot have budgets after budgets, a new team, a new story we're playing with. We have to be consistent about economic growth going forward. Countries that succeed have an objective over decades. We need to raise our GDP per capita by X. We need to have business investment grow by Y. And so this is what we need to focus on, because otherwise, if this is urgent now, but not urgent in 2 years, we're not going to come true on the growth that we need going forward.
Okay, I want to come back to you in a moment, Robert, just on where we are on the financial basics at this point. But Perrin, let me come to you because there's mixed reviews on what we should be doing. So we've got the little reprieve right now, but April is coming and there will be other tariffs at that point. So if we argue that US tariffs on us will punish not only us, but Americans, then if we impose tariffs, retaliatory tariffs, which we have, then it will not only punish the Americans, it will punish us. So given that this costs both ways, double, and then Trump had said earlier that if we put tariffs on his tariffs, then he'll put tariffs on those tariffs. Then the price just goes quite out. Where are you on this? Do you believe that we should be countering tariff for tariff, that is the right strategy despite the cost for every Canadian?
I think we have no choice but to respond if he goes ahead with this. The difficulty in dealing with a bully is that if you say, okay, hit me again, he'll do precisely that. You have to fight back. But the point in all of this is that tariff wars are like nuclear wars. Nobody wins. Some may lose more than others, but in the end, everybody loses. And that's why all of our governments have worked so hard for decades to avoid both, to take down the prospect of tariff wars or of nuclear war or of any other kind. And what's important here is to recognize the fact that what Donald Trump is doing is creating a self-inflicted wound. He's going to damage Canada, but he's going to damage Americans as well. Perhaps the single most important issue that led to his success in the presidential election was the sense among ordinary Americans the cost of living was too high and that the government didn't have a handle on that. Well, anytime that Americans go to the supermarket, anytime they fill up their car, if they're buying a new car, if they're planting a crop and need potash, need fertilizer, the cost is going up. And this is a direct result of these Trump taxes that he's imposing on Americans.
impact us the same way when we put the tariff
And
on
absolutely.
whether it's exports of electricity or oil and gas or what, that's again doubling down on ourselves. So that's what I'm trying to say. I
That's why
guess
we have to be judicious about it. We
yeah,
need to be
I
targeted in terms of what we're doing. Yes, there is a cost. Let's not kid ourselves about it.
yeah.
Nobody wants to see this, but we didn't initiate it. Um, I think we have to be wise about what we're doing, not simply saying, "Well, he's shot us in one foot. Why don't we shoot ourselves in the other?"
Right.
We need to target what we're doing. Some of the measures that we could respond with could be non-tariff measures that affect the ability to function. We should look at sectors where the U.S. is more vulnerable than we are. We should look at sectors where it's possible for us to either substitute Canadian products or products from other countries, and be judicious about what we're doing. But the goal always should be to let's get all of these things removed entirely.
Okay, I
yeah
want to come back to Robert just to do some number crunching if we can, because I think it was Mark Carney that said the other day that, our economy is in way better shape than the American economy. And I think everybody went, huh? What? So just some of the numbers, and we've been, not actual numbers, but issues, we've been dealing with this. Capital flight has been an issue in this country for a long time. Falling investment and production slowing, been an issue, at least the last 6 quarters. Collapse in productivity growth and lagging in real GDP growth. Debt deficits, inflation, 6 quarters. Housing crisis, unemployment, carbon taxes, clean fuel, low Canadian dollar, interest payments that are higher than the amount of money we spend on healthcare. What kind of shape are we really in to meet this? And should we have the current Prime Minister of the day out announcing spending programs when we're facing this?
I think we're in a very challenging situation, but one that we can solve over time.
Wow.
I still
Okay.
think we have fundamentals in Canada that are very positive. We have lots of energy, obviously, to offer to the world, natural resources, including critical minerals, nuclear energy that has become more and more popular. We have lots of talent, obviously, that is obvious through our best intensive research universities, but also Canadians, frankly, who are, skilled and as indigenous, sorry, as anyone else, and able to do well in the economy. What we don't have, in my opinion, is the right model of growth. The model of growth that we have basically based our economy on is basically real estate and consumption, as opposed of another better model of growth, which I think would be based on production, on selling things that the world needs.
Right.
And for that, you have to scale our companies. We have to be more innovative. We have to have more entrepreneurs, frankly, that are encouraged to take risk in the economy. And that speaks to our tax policy, to our our competitive markets. And so it's not one silver bullet. It's a lot of policies that are needed at this point. I think I'm still very optimistic about Canada. I think we can pull this off, but we can't.
But Robert, I'm sitting here in Western Canada where we've been fighting about whether or not we could get a pipeline to Tidewater so that we might be able to diversify
Yeah.
our customer base, and that we might be able to get the product that we're all sitting on top of to a place where it's needed, and people are prepared to pay for it. And that is not something we're going to do in the next 30 days or with the legislation that still exists on the books. Bill 69, carbon taxes, etc.
No, I agree. There are policy challenges, there are political challenges, but I think if I look at the change of public opinion in the last 30 days on these things, in my own province of Quebec, people were fiercely opposed, as you know, of any pipelines, both whether it was natural gas or it was oil. Today, Quebecers are, according to polls, 65, 70% in agreement of doing these things because they understand that the crisis in front of us requires us to actually exploit the resource that we have and be smarter about it, more strategic. So I'm hopeful that politicians will reflect that going forward. We certainly need also to get back to really basic things of execution, getting rid of these barriers we've put on ourselves, whether, as you mentioned, they are interprovincial trade or regulatory. Why does it take 12 years to approve a mine in Canada? That's not normal. And these are the barriers we've put on ourselves that I'm confident we can remove. But again, focus on economic growth, focus on a longer term agenda, not just like 30 days or a first 100 days of a government. This is the next 10 year ahead of us if we want to succeed, you know.
So that's the, and every politician of every stripe always promises that. And we've heard it from, Perrin, you spent a long time in government. That, even if we were to all get up, everybody of every political stripe tomorrow morning and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to follow Robert's advice and we're going to really get a long-term plan in place. We're going to do this. We still have these issues in the short term. And do we have, I don't know, the time, but more importantly, the will to kind of turn this around, to really say, no, this time we mean it?
Well, I think that's the fundamental question, and I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic as Robert is.
Wow, I'm so glad to hear you too.
That we can do this. Well, he makes the he made the point in terms of some of the fundamentals that we have. I put it another way: there's nobody on the face of the earth who is more fortunate than Canadians. If you look at our resource base, if you look at our peaceful society, if you look at our geography, our share of fresh water, and so on, the question is what we do with that. And where we've fallen so far behind is in two areas. The first is relative to our competitors who are driven and who recognize the fact that their efforts make the difference between a life of crushing poverty and relative affluence. But where we've fallen behind the most is relative to our potential as a nation. And one of the things, we may end up being grateful, believe it or not, in a perverse way, to Donald Trump for making us aware of all of the things that we take for granted. When you're born in an orchard, you reach out your hand and an apple falls into it.
Yeah.
You're inclined to believe that's your entitlement. What we're rediscovering is the fact that we can't take this for granted. It's not something that can't be taken away, and that our efforts actually make a difference. I can't remember, Pam, in my political consciousness, any time where all of the provincial premiers and where all of the political parties were united on one issue. And Donald Trump has done that for us. I believe if I were Prime Minister of Canada, I would designate January 20th, Inauguration Day, as Canadian Independence Day. And because we can date it back to then, where Canadians rediscover the love that they have for the country and their willingness to focus and to make sacrifices for their country.
Okay, but this is the other thing I want to get at, because even the Prime Minister was saying yesterday, we're still going to, boo your anthem at the hockey games, and it's not about you, it's about policies. And yes, we should really go and buy more Canadian goods and look for those little maple leaves. And yes, we shouldn't go to the US for a holiday. But, that's a response that individuals can take that makes them feel better. But can you harness that somehow to turn it into an incentive to actually change the way we do business in this country? I mean, yes, we can feel better if we go and find a jar of jam that comes from Canada, but that's having no impact on America. It might be making us feel better for 5 minutes, but
it's just a therapeutic benefit that it has.
Can that in any way be harnessed? And Robert, take a stab at this to actually do something, because that's like a series of individual moves as opposed to our leadership actually running with it and putting something in the window today. Just like in a little bit, a point of fentanyl czar. It would be great, but I haven't heard a word from the fentanyl czar, right?
Right.
So we kind of need some, and not just to please Trump, to convince Canadian citizens that this is worth it.
Yes, I think at the end of the day, what is required here is to really take stock of what we can control as a country, and everyone has a responsibility. It's not just, frankly, the governments, although they are responsible for the policy framework requiring business having confidence to invest. But I think, all sectors of society, including businesses, have a role here to step up and be the best of themselves. We've done it before, by the way. I think this from an historic perspective, Canada has been in very tough spots before. And we've done pretty well over time at getting ourselves to where we are generally as a country. I think, like you, Pam, I'm critical of basically where we've fallen behind, and to Perrin's point compared to our potential. I agree we're not there, but we still have what is required of a prosperous and very successful nation. But policy, I always say progress is a choice. Policy is something you really have to have agency. Again, it's not just a question of ambition and good ideas, it's a question of execution. I think the execution part has been really problematic in Canada at the federal level, the provincial level, at the municipal level. So if this can push us to execute better on very fundamental things, I think we can get on the other side in a much better shape,
Pam, can I pick up on that as well? Because it also comes down to the question of leadership.
Yeah.
And what our leaders are saying to us. And, we've got to get away from debates over plastic straws and tearing statues down to get back to basics about what makes countries great, what improves the quality of life for Canadians, what creates hope for next generations. And that means concentrating on the fundamentals. What are we doing to attract investment? How are we using? We're one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. And yet, can you imagine, Pam, you and I have both been in Ottawa for a long time. Is there any other country anywhere in the world that would be having a debate about, well, we have all of these resources. Well, gosh, it's sort of an embarrassment. Should we be leaving them in the ground?
Yeah.
I don't know any other country in the world where our government deliberately tries to destroy a sector like the energy sector. The policies coming out of Ottawa have been destructive. They've been embarrassed by the fact that we are resource rich. This may cause us to say to our leaders, we expect you to focus on the fundamentals, on things that will help to make us stronger and better. If Trump were to withdraw all of this today, we would still have to look at what do we need to do to make sure this can never ever happen again. And that means first of all lessening our dependence on the US, but secondly it means increasing our resilience so that we're able to withstand pressures which could come in any form. It could come not simply from the United States, it could come from Russia, with whom we have a boundary dispute. It could come from China, or it could come from another pandemic. How do we ensure that we have the resiliency that whatever is thrown at us, we have the ability to resist?
See, this is why I'm trying not to be, so doomsday here, but honestly, we went through 9/11 where the Americans said to us, we've got to get the border issue sorted out here. You have to know who's coming and going from your country. We need to have security. We had the 2008 crisis. We've had tariffs from Trump 1.0. Like there have been pressure points all along, and I'm just talking about the last 20 years, really. And we haven't responded. And every time we've said, this is really serious. This is a crisis. This is the time we have to change it. And I'm heartened, Robert, that Quebec says maybe we'll let a pipeline run through, but we're still, to Perrin's point, we've still got legislation in place that says it's going to take 12 years to build a mine, or we're not going to let that oil and gas get to Tidewater. So I know my attention span is short. I spent too many years in the media business, but it's just I'm looking for something specific. I watched Donald Trump say, in his country, we're bringing it all home. We're going to do our own business and make ourselves self-sufficient. And there's an announcement from Apple, and there's an announcement from the shipbuilder, and there's I don't know, Robert, do we just not have the resources to do that? We don't have the people that can make that decision corporately?
No, and I think the mistake that we can make, honestly, is to think that everything that Trump is doing to attract investment is the right way. I actually think that the last few weeks have created more uncertainty for his own investment climate. Playing with tariffs the way he has done, I think has created a lot of uncertainty, obviously for Canadian companies, but for American ones. And the proof of that is the CEOs Ford, GM, and Stellantis were in his office 2 days ago to beg him to stop this nonsense about killing the auto sector in North America. And he responded to that. No, I think, I'm encouraged somewhat by what I'm hearing from our leaders in the last few weeks, whether it's Mr. Polyev or Mr. Carney, even Madame Freeland, which is very different from what she did in government, speaking about, the necessity of growth, a more centrist, pragmatic agenda going forward, certainly one that I espouse myself. Hopefully they will put this into execution, but we have to demand better from our political leaders. I think I'm in agreement, violent agreement with both of you on that. But I think Canadians are there, and I think political leaders will feel it, are feeling it, that this is a moment we cannot waste. And in 2-3 years from now, if we have not done the homework, hopefully, people will be accountable for that. We just cannot do business as usual anymore.
Just on that score, Perrin, and I'll ask you to answer the political question because you've retired from your job there. But, we have been sitting here with uncertainty. The House of Commons wasn't even operating for the better part of the fall. Then we went into this extended prorogation. There's a leadership race underway in the governing party. It's kind of hard, would it have made a difference, do you think, if everybody was sitting in Parliament and there could have been some emergency legislation, or we might have been able to do something? Or does government have that power anyway and have just not yet done it?
You're better positioned to have a sense of the political temper in Ottawa than I am, Pam. But do I believe that we had a productive Parliament before it rose? No, it wasn't. But what we need more than anything else is to know who's going to be governing us for the next 4 years. We need to clear the air on that, and we need to ensure that whoever it is, whatever political party, that they have a mandate, and that they're able to go to Donald Trump and say, I'm speaking with a mandate from the people of Canada on behalf of Canada, and here's where we're coming from. So that to me is the critical issue. It's to clear the air and establish who's running the place. I've been focused on the G7. It's coming up in Kananaskis from the 12th to 15th of June. By then, Donald Trump could be on his third prime minister and being sworn in as president on January 20th.
No.
You're assuming that he will come, Perrin. I'm not ready to make that bet.
Assuming that he comes. Could you imagine, Robert, being the poor organizers of the G7 and trying to figure out what is the government of Canada going to want to be promoting, and B, is he going to be there? If he doesn't come, what are you going to talk about? If he does come, what are you going to talk about?
Yes.
It's a very tough job.
So a couple of questions I want to touch on as well. So because, we have a lot of heated rhetoric and discussion, which I think is important. I think it's important that we look at worst case scenario too. But what do you, given everything that Donald Trump has said, and he is the president of the United States and he does have a mandate, do we think that the free trade agreement, which is up for negotiation, it has too many names for starters, but we'll just say NAFTA 3 as opposed to CUSMA or USMCA or whatever. Do we think that's now dead from the signals that you are getting from him and hearing from him? And then I guess the other issue I want to get to is how we react in the short term in terms of spending. I know Polyev was saying the other day, don't use any of the money that you get from tariffs in the short term. Don't go on a spending spree in the sense of what we did in COVID and writing everybody checks and spending money, because we can't afford that either. So those are kind of two unrelated issues, but I want to hear from you both on both those topics. Robert, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I guess my two concerns are one, the risk for escalation. Trade wars are very dangerous that way because they can escalate very fast. And
Yeah.
on over the long term, I think Canada doesn't have the advantage, obviously, because we're not fighting with equal force, equal strength. The American economy is 10 times ours, and so it's going to be really difficult to sustain this over time. And the second concern that is even more worrisome is, what are the conditions for resolution? It's not clear to me at this moment what is it we are negotiating with the Americans, or with Mr. Trump, I should be more precise.
Yeah, exactly.
What is it exactly that he's looking for? As we've seen, the fentanyl, the borders, it's kind of cute for him to portray the discussions around that because it gives him legal cover in the US to put tariffs on, but we know those are not the issues. But we don't know exactly what he's looking for in terms of the next CUSMA or next agreement. He hasn't even gone there and told us how he sees it. By the way, there was his own deal that he signed
Correct.
8 years ago that he said was one of the greatest deal ever, that he's now violating blatantly in front of everyone in the world. So those are my two concerns. It's not clear to me that this will not get worse before it gets better in terms of escalation. And second, that we do understand the conditions for resolution. What problems are we trying to fix here? And when I look at what's ahead, free trade, I think Perrin mentioned this before, is where there's a win-win between two countries that do trade. If one country says, I want everything from you, but I'm not willing to concede on anything, that's not free trade. And we cannot be a junior partner who gives all the concession, but don't get the benefits of free trade. It's not free trade anymore. It's something else, but it's not trade. And that's what I'm worried about, in that whatever we think we can negotiate going forward, we have to make sure that we maintain balanced trade. And this is what we have right now. 500 billion of trade, more or less, on each side. A bit of imbalance on energy because they need our energy. But, at one point, if it's if the balance is not there, then it's not free trade anymore. And Canadian policymakers will need to decide, who is ever in government, whether it's a good deal for Canada. We're not there yet, but I'm worried that this will go this way.
Just on those 2 points, Perrin, which is, I think Robert raises the most fundamental point. What are we negotiating about here? We're not even sure. It's just, the tariffs that are coming on steel and aluminum are very different than the tariffs imposed and now withdrawn now, at this point, or at least suspended for a month. That'll have a whole different impact. But what are we trying to get to? I hear his objective in the US, which is to repatriate his economy. But to Robert's point, it's coming at a huge cost. The uncertainty has a huge opportunity cost for both our climates, and it's kind of we may end up in the worst of the worlds, because if their economy falters, that's another price we pay. They are our biggest customer.
Pam, it's history repeating itself. It is the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, where over 1,000 economists wrote a letter to Congress begging them not to go ahead with the tariff acts, with exactly the same arguments being made, that this will lift us and bring business to the United States and make us prosperous. Canada was the first country to respond to that. It didn't cause the depression, but it deepened and lengthened the depression as you saw global trade begin to spiral. That's the risk here. And what Donald Trump is doing is disrupting the global economy. You could see the amount of capital that was destroyed in the last 3 days on the stock exchanges. It's stunning. That doesn't make America great. that moves it in exactly the other direction. As relates to Kuzma, we shouldn't be the ones to walk away from it. Our goal should remain the same. We support free trade, and we believe in the rule of law. We believe that it has to be rules-based trade, where it's not survival of the law of the jungle, survival of
Yeah,
the
the
of the
most
fittest.
brazen, the one with the most TV clips. Yeah.
Exactly. So we should be continuing to be very focused on that and trying to bring things back on course to the best of our ability. The challenge that we have in dealing with Donald Trump is that he sees every relationship as transactional. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. He doesn't believe that these relationships can be win-win. There has to be, for Donald Trump, a clear winner and a clear loser, and he has to not only be the winner, but he must be seen to be the winner and to vanquish the other side. And that makes these negotiations extremely difficult as a result.
It's hard because we're also doing this in the context, and last week when we were doing the podcast, it was in the moments after the quote unquote showdown in the Oval Office with Zelensky, who many say was given bad advice, to go in and sort of go toe to toe with the president, because he does demand to win, and he does demand people to say you're sorry, we're sorry, and you're great, and all of those things.
Well, and thank you for hitting me.
Yeah.
Please do it again.
But that, and of course we've seen a letter now from President Zelensky, and we'll see if that fundamentally changes. But the same time as the world economic order through trade and whatnot is being kind of thrown up in the air, so is the world order on defense and the rules of the road for a peaceful coexistence. Not always. There's lots of wars going on, but like we've got those two things happening in a parallel way. They're not unrelated. And I don't know. I mean, I love to hear your optimism, but boy, oh boy, these are tough. This is a very tough coalescing of events. Robert, take a.
I'm actually that's where one part where I'm less optimistic on the international security architecture, where essentially what is happening is the world as we've known it since the Second World War is deconstructing itself.
Yeah.
And what we thought was a given, which is a security alliance, NATO, for Western country, may not be longer there. Whether it's whether it is dismantled officially, I have my doubts. I don't think a president can do that on its own in the US. He will need Congress. But in practice, you have to ask yourself if Russian tanks would, roll into a European country, whether the US would be there to defend it under Article 5. I'm not sure. And even in our own country, in the Arctic, if we had some kind of aggression, I'm not sure that, to be honest, the alliance as we've known it would be there for us. And so that's a paradigm shift that is very consequential, that is very costly. A country like Canada that has underspent on defense going to have to rise its spending really fast, build some capacity, and I'm hoping we'll do that seriously. But for every country, look at what Germany did this week. $500 billion, $500 million, sorry, in defense under the new chancellor. You look at what President Macron has announced in terms of nuclear deterrence for Europe. Those are very, very serious.
Yeah, and the Nordic countries are, they're all. Yeah.
So this is very live, and I think a huge wake-up call for everyone in the Western world.
Cast your mind way back, Perrin Beatty. You were defense minister at one point in this country. I mean, can we play that catch-up game to? I mean, it helps our economy, obviously, if we have those kinds of expenditures. But Have we lost too much of our own infrastructure to get the real benefit from defense spending other than jobs and securing our reputation? But can we do it?
A lot of our defense industrial base is atrophied. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And our armed forces have atrophied as well. But I believe that we should be focusing not simply on economic sovereignty, but on our physical security as well. We've moved from a world that was dangerous to one that is infinitely more dangerous since January 20th. What Donald Trump is doing is he's saying to aggressors like Putin, you can get away with it. You can push international boundaries and defy the sovereignty of other countries. Putin doesn't play well with his contiguous neighbors, and we just happen to be one with a boundary dispute with him at the present time. And we need to recognize that we're living in a world that is unsafe, and that the guarantor that we used to count on in the past, the United States, is pulling back and saying, "Don't count on us to be there when you need us." That's the dramatic change that's been made here. The United States has always been the anchor that's ensured democracy, ensured stability, ensured peace, and ensured prosperity. It's pulling back from that role in the world and creating a vacuum that is drawing the worst players in. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and so on. Now, where I'm more optimistic than I think probably either you or Robert is that, absolutely, I agree that this has gotten more dangerous, and it's going to be costly and difficult for us to assume more of the responsibility for our own security. But I also see an opportunity that Canada can reestablish itself on the international front. We have become an asterisk in international affairs in recent years. But increasingly, the other industrialized democracies are asking the same questions as we are. If the United States pulls back, what can we do working together to guarantee democracy and to guarantee stability and freedom? And Canada can play a key role there if we're prepared to focus not on wokeism, but on the fundamental issues of promoting democracy and security and sovereignty of countries.
Okay, I've kept you longer than I promised, but I just want one final question. So we're going to stipulate that Donald Trump is the root of all evil here. But that said, if you magically were the Prime Minister of Canada tomorrow morning, say we could magically resolve all of that, what one thing could we do to mitigate, to move us in the right direction? And I know there are 1,000 things, but just pick one that you think would really make a difference and start us on the right track in the next 30 days. Robert?
I would start with energy security and energy exports. I think this would be something we could solve quite easily and would give us a sense of progress on the economic front, on the security front, on the diversification front. So I think if I were in that position, this is what I would focus on in the immediate term.
So get rid of
outside solving, obviously, the conflict we have with the US on
no,
the
I
trade.
understand, but I mean, sort of, let's take the restrictions off and the legislation. Let's get that stuff out of the ground. Let's sell it to somebody.
Yeah.
Okay, Perrin?
I think it's a very good starting point. Let's look at Energy East, Pam. We've left ourselves vulnerable because we import oil from the United States into Eastern Canada. Donald Trump could cut that off. And Donald Trump could cut that off if he wanted to do that. I met 3 years ago now with Chancellor Scholz of Germany in Berlin at the time of the B7, and I asked him if the Russians were to pull back today and pull out of Ukraine, would Germany be prepared to go back to the status quo ante, the way that things used to be? His response was, no, we can't go back. And he said, and I've said to Mr. Trudeau that Canada needs, Germany needs Canadian liquefied natural gas. But he's told me that it's too difficult to do. It would take too long.
No business case.
if the government of Canada had been fighting for Energy East instead of putting barriers in the way of Energy East, that would be well under construction.
Yeah.
What we need to do is to send a clear message to the world that this has come to an end, that we're determined to share our resources with the rest of the world, that we're going to use them as a means of both increasing prosperity in Canada and of backstopping democracy. And that our goal is to create growth in Canada and to ensure that our country is more prosperous, more sovereign, and more secure. That message in itself is the single most important thing.
And maybe deal with some of those, that uncertainty issue that we've been dealing with for a long time. I'm glad, because I think we're all in agreement on that it's kind of got to be the priority. I was reading an article earlier this morning, Robert, and it said with all that's going on, we should buy our favorite economist a drink. So I will do that. And then we should buy our former business leaders and politicians, Perrin, a drink. So when I next see you both, I will do that.
The events are enough to drive us to drink.
To drive us to drink. And we're taking all that booze off the shelves now, so we don't know what there'll be left to do. Thank you both so much for taking this on and really, I think, highlighting for us where we have to put our energies excuse the pun, in the next little while. Perrin Beatty, former head of the Chamber of Commerce, and Robert Asselin, Vice President of Policy at the Business Council of Canada. So that's it for this edition of No Nonsense. We'll see you again very soon, and I'm sure we'll be talking about very many of the same issues. We'll see you then.